Welcome to Olympian Water Testing, giving you the best in water analysis. Today we're looking at OSHA, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, with lead in construction. What happens with lead in construction? Well, let's talk about it, because if you're working in construction sites, or if you know people who are, then they can be exposed to lead, and they have a higher chance of that happening. So you need to know the signs, and you need to know some ideas of what to do. So pure lead PB is a heavy metal at room temperature and pressure, and it's a basic chemical element that combines with other various substances, and it has been poisoning workers for thousands of years, and especially people who worked on different construction sites back in the day probably got a lot more exposure to lead. And it can damage the several nervous system, the cardiovascular system, reproductive system, hematological system, and the kidneys, and even lead to death. And there's some symptoms here, such as loss of appetite, nausea, headache, fine tremors, hyperactivity, muscle and joint pain, and you can also see the risks. But what are the risks for workers and construction workers? Well, lead is most commonly absorbed into the body by inhalation, and when workers breathe in lead as dust, fume, mist, or in their lungs, or get it through water as well, the upper respiratory tract, absorb it in the body. They can also absorb lead through the digestive system if it enters the mouth and is ingested. And that can particularly happen if the water is exposed to lead. A significant portion of lead inhaled or ingested gets into the bloodstream, and once the bloodstream lead circulates through the body, it is stored in various organs and body tissues, and some of this lead is filtered out of the body quickly and excreted, but some remains in the blood and tissues. And it can even retain in some of the bones as well, and potentially cause problems like osteoporosis or other issues. As exposure continues, the amount stored will increase if the body absorbs more lead than it excretes, and the lead stored in the tissue can slowly cause irreversible damage, first to individual cells, then to organs, then to whole body systems. And a big thing to note is there is no safe amount of lead. While adults may be able to handle it better than infants or children, there's no safe amount. And construction workers with lead exposure, in construction, lead is used frequently for roofs, cornices, tank linings, electrical conduits, in plumbing, soft solder, and that as the solder gets older, it can start to leak lead particles into the water. Used chiefly for soldering tin plate and copper pint joints, is an alloy of lead and tin, and soft solder has been banned for many uses in the United States. In addition, the Consumer Product Safety Commission bans the use of lead-based paint in residences because lead-based paint inhibits the rusting and corrosion of iron and steel. However, lead continues to be used in bridges, railways, ships, lighthouses, and other steel structures, so it's still used quite often. And construction varies on the scope and potential for exposing workers to lead and other hazards, and projects such as removing paint from a few interior residential doors may involve limiting exposure. Other projects, however, may involve removing or stripping substantial quantities of lead-based paints on large bridges and structures. And as we can see, OSHA does have a lead standard, but what's important to note is, yes, it's not being used for paints. That's good. But there are still projects such as bridges, railways, ships, lighthouses, and other structures that we use every day that construction workers are exposed to. So it's always a good idea in construction sites, if you know people in construction, or if you're a foreman or doing any type of that work, to always have your water and everything around periodically tested for lead.